Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Gallery Teachers Masterclass. My name is Nicky Partridge, and today we are going to be looking at the very interesting topic of speaking strategies to manage difficult questions. The name of my masterclass today is, that's a very interesting question. Speaking strategies for managing difficult questions. And I will come on to tell you exactly why I've given it that name in a moment. So just before we get started and get into the nitty-gritty of the topic, a little bit about me. My name is Nicky Partridge. I am British. I am based in Cardiff in the United Kingdom, so I am Welsh as well. And I am the centre manager and owner of a private language school called Peartree Languages. I am also a teacher trainer and senior EFL teacher with over 20 years of practical classroom experience. So that's a very interesting question. I would like to start off today with a little anecdote, a little tale from my past, okay? So once when I was examining a well-known EFL exam, a candidate walked into my speaking exam session very confidently and sat down in the chair, ready to take the speaking test. So like all most EFL exams, the first part is usually familiar questions, so questions that are not too difficult. I can't remember exactly the question that I asked this candidate, but I believe it was probably something about work or studies, a very, very straightforward question. The candidate looked at me and sat back in the chair and said, that's a very interesting question. Stop. So I continued to the next question, which was something equally as user-friendly, another very, very straightforward question. And this time, so the candidate very enthusiastically shifted their posture in the chair and looked at me again and said, thank you for asking. That's a very interesting question. Nothing else. So by now I'm starting to wonder, you know, is there a candid camera somewhere? Am I the victim of a joke, of a trick? Is something going on here? It was baffling to me. And so I went in with the third question. And this time I believe it was something about pets. Did you have a pet as a child? The candidate looked at me and again altered their posture and changed their voice a little bit and said, thank you for asking. That's such an interesting question. Dog. And the point was, it wasn't really a very interesting question. And at that point, it became absolutely crystal clear to me that this candidate did not really have the level of English required to manage this English language exam, but had obviously been told by somebody, not a teacher, I hope, that, look, learn a little speaking strategy, learn a few words, put another few words in and use the right kind of intonation in your voice and you'll get some marks at least. The rest of the exam went in a very similar kind of way, lots of very interesting questions and a lot of other words that didn't make a lot of sense when they were put all together. But what it really made me think about is, what is the role of speaking strategies when we are giving our students help to manage speaking situations, communicative English, and when are they useful and when are they not useful? So my aim of this masterclass is to try to give you some practical, concrete examples of takeaway speaking strategies and functional language that you can teach immediately in your EFL classroom across a range of levels and objectives, so that you never ever have the nightmare situation of a student who walks into an exam and all they can say is, that's a very interesting question. Okay, so moving on. What are we going to do today? Well, first of all, we're going to have a look at what exactly is a speaking strategy. What do I mean by speaking strategy? I'm going to suggest 3 scenarios where a speaking strategy could be useful, okay? And I'm actually going to be giving you some takeaway language, lots and lots of real takeaway language that you can start to implement immediately into your classrooms. We'll also consider the pitfalls of pre-learning chunks of language, okay? Because it's not always appropriate. We're going to spice it up a little bit with natural language, with some authentic English, because if we are going to be teaching people some speaking strategies that they can essentially pre-learn to go into not only an exam, but could also be into the real world, just to be able to manage communicative situations better. Why not do it with some authentic natural language? We're going to have a look at why it is important to teach speaking strategies, okay? Why exactly should these have a place in your, let's say, language input sessions? And finally, how can we teach these strategies, okay? Great. And as I said, there will be plenty of examples, so you may well need a pen and paper to jot some of these down. First of all, what is a speaking strategy? What is it? What exactly do I mean here when I say speaking strategy? Okay. Now, first of all, I'm talking about speaking. Okay. Probably the clue was in the title there, right? But what I mean is these items of functional language, I intend to be used in speaking scenarios, not in writing scenarios, okay? So spoken language, written language is quite different. So this is language for speaking situations. Okay, a strategy is a kind of plan. Well, it is and it isn't a strategy. So a strategy is something that you need to do to meet your objectives. So you have a strategy because you have a set of objectives. So you say, this is what I'm going to do. This is my roadmap to get from here to here to here. And then the plan is the detail of exactly how you will execute that strategy, okay? So what we're actually going to do to execute our strategy is a plan that involves functional language, okay? So functional language is the language that is needed in everyday situations, or the actual language that is needed to manage a specific situation. And I've already mentioned authentic language and natural English. So one of the things that I like to do in my classes is to sort of use alternative ways of talking about familiar concepts, okay? So rather than saying that this is language that might be suitable more for, let's say, a beginner level, A1, A2, let's say it's suitable for people who have just left the station, okay? So we imagine that learning a language is a journey, okay? We're trying to get to a destination, which is whatever the person has in mind for themselves as their destination. So we'll say, this is suitable language. If you see one train, this means it's for people who just left the station. If you see two trains, it's for people who are chugging along. 3 trains is for the people who are already going full steam ahead. Okay, so by using some of this kind of fun and unusual language in your classes, it actually boosts lexical development. And you don't need to take my word for it, because as a little side note, there was an excellent article recently in the EL Gazette by Gillian Ragslade, who mentioned that a number of pieces of research have been done to show that when we teach our students less common language, so for example, full steam ahead, instead of saying somebody is advanced, it sticks a lot better, and it actually helps to promote lexical development on the whole. Okay, side note, speaking strategy. So we are talking about a speaking plan and using functional language. So let's have a look at a few different scenarios and a few concrete examples of the functional language that I'm talking about here. So scenario number 1. This is language that can be used when the person who's required to speak, so the listener, the person who's receiving the question, has a complete breakdown in coherence, and they require clarification. Okay. One of the most common filler strategies that people use is, I don't understand. Okay, I don't understand. I don't understand, in my opinion, is not a very good piece of strategic language, okay? First of all, it's not really used in natural scenarios unless the person doesn't understand the concept. But really here, what the person's saying is, I don't understand the words, the meaning of the words. So I would try to avoid using this, or try to discourage your students from using this. It's not very natural. It's not advanced at all. So I would try to give them some different kinds of functional language as follows. So can you repeat that, please? Would you mind explaining the word, please? Okay. So this is a one train kind of piece of language. All right. So more at the beginner end. So for somebody a little bit further along, chugging along on their journey, you can teach them this. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. And finally, for the three trains students, we can have language like, I don't think I catch your drift. Okay, so very, very authentic, natural language. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the word or the concept or the idea of something, okay? Isn't this a much, much, much better way of saying, I need you to say that again, please? I don't understand, than actually saying, I don't understand, or simply just getting a little bit more clarification. And the next thing that I think is the next device that I think is particularly nice is if you teach your students to say, thank you for clarifying. Okay, thank you for clarifying. It's polite, it helps the conversation to flow. And it's very natural. Okay, so scenario number one, breakdown, need for clarification. Okay, scenario number two, playing for time. Okay, now this is a scenario that I find is extremely useful for people, especially students who are going to be doing exams. Especially the very high stakes exams, where potentially towards the end of the speaking exam, the questions themselves are tough. I mean, the concepts, not only the language, you really, really might need a little bit of time to play with, to be able to formulate an answer. Okay. And the same for people who are quite nervous. These kinds of devices, these strategies are extremely useful. Now, in my red balloon here, I have this with a big line through the middle. This is the most common default that people use when they are looking for a piece of lexis. Okay, we all do it from time to time. The problem is if it's very, very, very long, because in fact, what the person is doing is searching for an answer in their mind. So the odd, okay, is not a problem, but it must not become, all right. What are the alternatives? Well, alternatives for gathering your thoughts, for eating up the time as well, are things like this. Just a moment, please. Just a moment, please. The person is saying these words, but because they have learnt them in advance, okay, and drilled them in classroom practice, they're actually coming out of their mouth almost subconsciously, giving that person, even a one-train learner, enough time to think about what they want to say next. Let me take a moment to think about that. Again, you can really drag these out, not too much, okay? But you can drag them out a little bit. That's certainly a question, a topic, or a matter that warrants careful consideration. Let me pause for thought there, okay? If that's a little bit too long, let me pause for thought. This is another great way of stalling for a little bit of time. Whoop, went too fast there. Okay, scenario number three, the politician's favorite, deflecting. Okay, also known as managing the question, managing the examiner if it's an exam, pivoting or bridging. Okay, so I mentioned this is the politician's favorite. There are, in fact, many courses online, nothing to do with English language learning, but where you can actually go and learn the skills of deflecting difficult questions that you just, it's not just that you want to seek clarification or buy some time. You really don't want to answer them at all. Okay, we are not going to be going into that today, but perhaps this is one of the most important techniques that we can teach to people to manage difficult speaking situations. So a little bit of language here. I've never really given this topic any thought because, all right. Thank you for your question. And then go on to answer a different type of question, not a completely different type of question, but again, you're thanking them for their question, and then you're going to go off maybe down a slightly different road. I'm no expert, but I would say, so this is a kind of covering your back, all right? So if you're really, really not too sure about the facts of your answer, I'm no expert, but I would say, and I'm sorry, or I'm afraid, okay? Particularly in British English, which is the version of English that I speak, we're always apologizing. I'm sorry, it's raining, even though it's not my fault it's raining. So this is a very, very nice little piece of language to use. Okay, so it's a good question, but, oh, by the way, so the ones that we have in red, I think can be used for any level, okay? Any level at all. It's a good question, but is more interesting for me, okay? So let's just have a look at the next one. I see where you're coming from still. I understand your valid question. However, I think we can also consider, so if we, on my next slide, I'm going to give you even more examples of this, but if we imagine that a person has learnt a lot about recycling, but not so much about traffic calming measures, but the topic in general is the environment. And the person asking the question asks about traffic calming measures. And the person answering the question doesn't really have the language or the ideas. It's a good question, traffic calming. But more interesting for me is recycling. And then go on to say a little bit about recycling. So we're on the topic, we're still on the topic of, let's say, environment or things we can do to help the environment, okay? But we've gone down a slightly different angle, okay? So we've managed the question in this sense, we've deflected in this sense, okay? So one of the things we can also, I should also mention at this point is if this is a real skill and it is important to practice this a lot because it cannot be the case that the answer is completely tangential, okay? So we cannot say, for example, thank you very much. I see where you're coming from asking about traffic calming, but still football is more interesting to me. All right, so we cannot go completely tangential, but it is possible to manage and deflect a little bit. And let's have a little look at deflection from the experts. So one of my personal heroines here, Wonder Woman, who we know has the wonderful bracelets that she's able to deflect bullets and all kinds of things coming towards her. So let's have a look at deflection in action. So I've just written 3 different answers to this question, which is pretty complicated. I'll just give you a moment to read those. Okay, moving on. Let's spice it up. So I mentioned earlier that it's great. It's a great idea if you can introduce some authentic, some natural English into these speaking strategies, into this functional language, okay? These are also great to, in any of the scenarios I've mentioned, so deflecting, okay, pivoting, also if you're trying to buy time, or also if you don't understand something, okay? So the word is on the tip of my tongue, rather than, again, just sitting there going, I don't know, the word is it's on the tip of my tongue. Sorry, it's gone. Okay, you're going to get a lot more credit either from the examiner or the person who is you're interacting with if you use language like this rather than simply saying, I don't understand or I don't know. Okay, a few more here. I'll let you read through them. And if I just draw your attention to the last but one, so this topic is not really my bag. I prefer something. Okay, this is a strategy that I teach very, very often to my students, particularly my exam students. If they are asked, for example, people often say, what do I do if I get a topic that I know nothing about? I say, well, we have to try one of these strategies. In this case, you have to try to redirect the examiner. And this is a great way to do that. Shopping, it's not really my bag. I prefer spending time with my friends. And then perhaps, depending on the exam or the conversation, the person asking the question will be able to go down a different road with you rather than struggling on. For example, for me, if somebody asked me about football, I wouldn't have the foggiest, not a clue. So rather than struggling and feeling I really can't give my best performance on the topic of football, I'd say, well, football is not really my bag. I prefer rugby, which is something, being Welsh, I do know about. Okay. Warnings. Now, like any strategy, there are risks associated with learning pre-taught chunks of functional language, okay? And it's really, really important that you're aware of these. Remember, that's a very interesting question. We don't want to go down that road. Okay, so what are the pitfalls? 3 pictures here, okay? 3 pictures. Overuse, okay? Overuse, relying too much on these kinds of devices, okay? So you're using them over and over and over again, okay? This is a problem. You would need to have a range of them, okay? Ideally, you don't use one more than once in any particular conversation or exam. You must not use the same ones over and over again. It's important that they don't contain errors. Okay, so rather than the first thing that comes to my mind is, maybe somebody says the first thing that comes to my head is, and then it's obvious it's been learned, it's obvious it's been memorized, okay, because it's got an error in it. So this will actually work against the person who is speaking. And if the person speaking, the student speaking, either overuses or commits errors, it's going to sound unnatural as a blue apple, okay? And it will sound forced, unnatural, and pre-learned. Okay, so why is any of this important? Well, first of all, as I've mentioned a few times now, it's important for students who are taking exams. So these kinds of devices, these speaking strategies are very, very useful for people taking exams because it buys them time. They can really access their best language because they have bought themselves some time to think. Simply using these kinds of cohesive devices in themselves helps the person to sound a lot more coherent, a lot more fluent, and it's just generally very, very positive. In addition, it's useful for people to feel more confident when they are speaking, all right? Recently, we have been teaching some students here who are really struggling with their confidence for their exams. And although they're very, very fluent in their day-to-day life, they have a real phobia of exams, okay? And this can happen. By giving people some hooks, it's like a hook for them to hook their language onto, yeah? It means that people go into the exam feeling a lot more confident when they're speaking. I think people do this with writing skills, so they'll learn certain phrases, certain strategies that they can kind of hook their writing onto. But there's this constant fear amongst people taking speaking exams. What if they ask me a difficult question? What if they ask me a question I just have no idea what to answer? Well, yes, that could happen. But here are some strategies for how you cope with that situation. Here is some language, so you're not left going, and actually having a really bad moment in the exam that's going to really adversely affect your end result, okay? using some of these speaking strategies, you could pull it back to a point where the candidate can still get a good mark. And last of all, it's a life skill. So I jokingly mentioned the politicians, but we're all asked difficult questions in our lives from time to time. And of course, we are teaching our learners to be able to speak English so that they can go ahead into their lives, into their jobs, into their travels with English language under their belt. Okay, so it is a life skill, and they can pull these tools out whenever they need to in any kind of speaking situation where there is a difficult question. So just to very briefly refer to some exams, okay, we can see that this is important when we look at the actual requirements of some of the mainstream exams. We can see that examiners are actually looking for these sorts of speaking strategies, okay? So this is taken from a PET exam. And it mentions interactive communication. Okay, so we've got there, this includes initiating and responding without undue hesitation. Okay, so by using a filler word rather than an we reduce the undue hesitation. The ability to use interactive strategies. Okay, so exactly what we're talking about here, to maintain or repair communication. All right, so in the field of turn taking as well, let's not forget that it may not necessarily be the examiner asking the question. It could be in one of the collaborative tasks. And again, rather than saying, I don't know, I don't understand, you use one of those strategies with your the other candidates in the collaborative task, and it will just be leave a much more positive impression with the examiner. Let's take a look at IELTS, okay? So a couple of red stars here. So these are things that are where it points IELTS specifically, the band descriptors. All of these links will be available in the notes, okay, after the session. So here, if you take a look around band 5, we can see here that may overuse certain connectives or discourse markers. So this is what I was talking about, the pitfalls, okay? So learning one or two, but not really using them correctly, and then just saying them over and over and over again, all right? The candidate would not be able to have to get a band higher than 5 in fluency. If we look at pronunciation, okay, we can see that uses a limited range of complex structures, and they usually contain errors. So this would be learning speaking strategies, but not correctly, okay? So getting them slightly wrong, faulty. If we jump ahead to bands 7 and then up to 8, 9, we can see that where people get, the candidate will get credit for using these kinds of devices well. Okay, 7 uses a range of connectives and discourse markers with some flexibility. All right. If we look at lexical resource, uses some less common and idiomatic vocabulary. So this goes back to my slide, let's spice it up. Yeah, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's on the tip of my tongue. Let me take a shot in the dark. Yeah, so using this kind of authentic idiomatic language is going to really lift up the bands for lexical resource. And then finally, if we look at bands 8 and 9 on fluency, okay, we've got at a 9, speaks coherently with fully appropriate cohesive features, okay? And hesitation is only content related. They're not looking for words or grammar. So there's absolutely no sense of I don't understand the words. It's you're using these sorts of speaking devices to look for content so that you're freeing up some mental space to find content. Okay. So just to recap, this is important to pass exams, to feel more confident when speaking. I'm not giving you a toolkit. I'm giving you a tool belt. All right. So this is not a catch-all. This is not everything you need to know to be able to speak for communicative language, okay? This is a tool belt. So you have your tool belt around your waist, and every now and again, when somebody asks you a difficult question, you've got your hammer, okay? You've got your spanner, you've got your screwdriver. So I intend these speaking strategies to work like a tool belt, okay? Not a toolkit. It is not a one-stop solution for communicative English. And finally, life skill. Okay, so how can I teach speaking strategies? I'm very, very well aware that I am almost out of time here today. You know, I could talk the hind leg off a donkey, as we say. However, I would like to discuss this with you a lot more in our Q&A session. So please do have a good think about this. How can we teach these speaking strategies? Okay, so I've told you what a speaking strategy is. I've given you plenty of concrete examples. I've told you why I think they're important. Okay, how do we teach them? So little bit of an idea here. It's you can pre-teach and drill. Okay, drilling is very important. A realistic selection of appropriate lexical terms as part of as part of language development. Okay, so for me, the teaching part of it is done within language development. Okay, and then you provide opportunities to practice the strategies. Yeah. During speaking segments or entire speaking classes, focusing on achieving the intended language function. So for example, one day you could be practicing pivoting, bridging language, okay? You pre-taught the language in a different session. When it comes to the speaking conversation segment, it's just about practicing, all right? Okay, so I hope that has really been a very interesting question. No, really, I hope it was a very interesting question. And thank you very, very much for attending my masterclass. I'm really looking forward to pulling apart, picking lots of these ideas with you more in the Q&A. There are plenty of fantastic masterclasses available now on Gallery Teachers. I regularly watch them myself. I find them absolutely fascinating, and I strongly recommend that you do the same. So our first question today is related to authentic language, English language, and how important it is to include authentic or natural English into our speaking strategies. So from my point of view, it is extremely important that whatever speaking strategies we work on and develop with our students, they are peppered with plenty of authentic and natural English. Because not only will this help the flow and the rhythm and the natural sound of the person's communicative language skills, it will also get the student lots of credit if they are to take a recognized English language exam. So a difficult question is a question that somebody struggles to answer in the moment, okay? This could be for a range of different reasons. It could be because they have not understood the language. It could be because they have understood the language, but they need some time to come up with their ideas, to decide on the content, or really just to access their best language to put that on display in their answer. Or it could be a question that somebody asks and a person has an answer, but it's not exactly the answer. So they would require some kind of pivoting strategy, okay? So this would also be an example of how to manage a difficult question being any question that somebody struggles to answer in the moment.